Welcome, Sebastián Arcos to Conversatario Cubano at the University of Florida. We are so delighted that you have joined us today.
Thank you very much, Lily, for your kind invitation. I'm happy to be here.
Sebastián Arcos is the Interim Director of the Cuban Research Institute at our sister institution, FIU, Florida International University, where he has been Interim Director, I think, for less than a year so far, but has a very long relationship with CRI. And so the first question that I want to ask you, especially for those of us who are unfamiliar with the kinds of activities that the Cuban Research Institute engages in and promotes, what role has CRI, as it's better known, the Cuban Research Institute, played in the study of Cuba in the past? And what kind of role do you see that it might be playing currently and in the future?
I don't want to brag, but I would say that CRI is fundamental in the study of Cuba for a number of reasons. We are located in Miami. That's the home base of the Cuban diaspora, especially the Cuban diaspora in the United States. The largest concentration of Cubans outside of Cuba anywhere in the world is here in Miami. It makes sense. I think that's what the university thought back in 1991 when the institute was created, that there was a good reason to have a distinctive, separate institute, academic institute, dealing with Cuba within the context of the already existing Latin American and Caribbean Center, which is Title VI institution. It's a very respected institution. It made sense to have a Cuba separate institute because of the critical mass of Cuban exiles living here. And FIU was already back then, and that role has only increased with time. It was the college for Cuban Americans. Before the creation of FIU, all those Cuban Americans who wanted to have a graduate degree or a college degree had to either go to or go to US. Those were essentially the two main places to be. Now, FIU has become the place to be. We have not only the largest Hispanic population of students in the United States. We graduate more than any other university in the United States. But we also have the largest mass of Cuban American students. And I cannot give you a number because the university doesn't ask, where are you originally from in the application forms. So we don't know exactly. We estimate that it should be somewhere around 25,000.
Out of a total population in the student body?
58,000 that we have right now at FIU. We are the second largest public university in Florida. 58,000 is a lot of students. And we think that a significant amount of those are of Cuban American descent.
Okay.
Or Cuban Americans who are arriving from Cuba, because this is an ongoing migration that hasn't stopped so far. So the role is key. We are within the community, and we serve as a source for many others who don't have the privilege of being close to a large group of Cuban Americans who want to understand what is going on. We are, of course, also at the tip of South Florida, closer to Cuba than anybody else. And the linkages between the island and the diaspora are very, very strong here in South Florida. So information flows both ways all the time. There is always a way to find out what's going on in Cuba yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we don't have to wait. There is no delay. It's almost immediately. There are plenty of sources that we can use, even though we cannot, and you can say we cannot because there are certain state regulations that prohibit us from traveling to Cuba. Some of us prefer not to go for other reasons. This is my personal case. I have plenty of reasons not to go.
Right. We'll get to those in a second.
Yeah, but that doesn't create a critical vacuum of information regarding Cuba. We have many, many other sources that we can use. And there are many Cuban academics who reside in the island, and they managed to get out one way or another. And then we managed to bring them here one way or another to discuss topics that are very relevant to what is going on right now. So our mission is to deliver information on Cuba and to facilitate research on Cuba. So in that particular area, which is our most academic one, we work with a core faculty of more than 50, I think we are around 55, 56 FIU faculty who study Cuba. At least a significant portion of what they do in their own academic studies involves Cuba. So we have from poli-sci to architecture and music and you name it, somebody is looking at Cuba one way or another. So we lean on that faculty to do research, to present research, recently published books. We also facilitate graduate students and undergraduate students with scholarships. We have the Jose Antonio Echeverria Scholarship, which covers both undergraduate and graduate. We have the Eliana Rivero Scholarship, which is mostly for graduate students. We have the Diaz Ayala Scholarship, which is also for graduate students and faculty, by the way. We're just having a professor in musicology coming next month in May. We have four students, three students and one faculty coming next month to look at to use the library, the Diaz Ayala collection. So there are many different things that we do on a regular basis. We have an extensive programming of public events, books presentations, film presentations. By the way, free commercial. On May 1st, we are presenting the movie Adios Cuba, which was just in the Miami Film Festival with the director. The director will be here with us and will be answering questions from the public. This is something we do on a regular basis. We collaborate with many of the community NGOs, groups, such as Instituto de la Memoria Histórica Cubana contra el Totalitarismo. We work with the Brigade 2506. We work with many of the community groups in order to facilitate also events here. Sometimes they are not necessarily our events, but we help them by providing spaces for example, in October, we're going to host the Association for the Study of the Cuban Economy here in the annual conference. We have been doing this now for 3-4 years in a row, and we hope that it will continue. I think it makes sense that we collaborate with the association. This year, we already have a panel organized by CRI that will be presented at this conference. These are just examples of the things that we do on a regular basis that we believe is important in order not only to deliver information and support research, but also to connect with the most important resource that we have, which is our Cuban American community down here.
Absolutely. I want to thank FIU because I was a recipient of a Diaz Ayala Fellowship. Cuba is part of that collection, the Diaz Ayala collection, but it's also one of the largest, if not the largest collection, archival collection. Latin American music. Yeah. It's extraordinary. But I wanted to say that the Cuban Heritage Collection, which is in the University of Miami, often is a natural site of research for those interested in Cuba and Cuban Americans, but certainly FIU's archive is underappreciated and is competitive in many respects because they have such wonderful, rich cultural archives about Cuba. So
yeah, and it's growing. It keeps growing. We have the also the genealogy collection that is extraordinary. I was just helping a couple who is writing a novel about their own family based on historical facts. And we visited the genealogy collection. We were able to rummage through some of the books. It's incredible, the resources that they have there, where you can find where your family last name came from in Spain, and even the coat of arms of the family. It's just amazing. It's an incredible resource.
That's wonderful. Well, listen, I also want to not fail to address your own personal and family's history as key activists in the opposition, first to the Fulgencio Batista dictatorship in the 1950s, and then to the consolidation and continuation of communist rule under Fidel Castro. You came to the United States in 1990 as a young man. Your father and your uncle were both known and jailed, as you were, for human rights activism. But in particular, your uncle, I think, who passed away in Cuba, continued to fight for human rights. And so as a result, your family is sort of keenly aware and connected to those who struggle openly for human rights on the island. And I think a lot of us really don't know to what degree any of that activism is still happening. Who you would point to as perhaps leaders of that? I think since the massive protests that took place July 11, 2021, we've had an extraordinary degree of repression. There are still, more than 1,000 people in jail. And so as a result, one of the absences in the public discourse is the discussion of what is happening on the island with regard to those who will still be holding the flag, or still holding the flag for change and human rights in particular, and responding to the repression that is more recent. So I wonder if you could update us, give us some sense to what degree human rights is still being articulated in Cuba, and who are those who are doing that kind of protest. What is the nature of their condition currently?
Well, as you mentioned, I used to be an activist in Cuba more than 30 years ago. Believe it or not, I've been involved in the fight for human rights for almost 40 years of my life. Right now, I'm growing old fast. It began as a very small movement, essentially following the model that came out of the Soviet Union with Andrei Sakharov, and the Charter 77 that came out of Czechoslovakia with Václav Havel. But that group expanded very quickly in the late 80s as Gorbachev came out with his glasnost and perestroika reforms. There was a perception in the island that communism was reaching the end of a tunnel. I am currently reading a book, and I have to mention this because I know you will be interested in this. This is a book that was published last year. It's an absolutely extraordinary reading. It's the history of the Soviet dissident movement, written by Benjamin Nathans. The title is fantastic, and I can completely relate to it. The title is "To the Success of Our Hopeless Cause." And it connects with what I was saying. One of the fundamental differences between a totalitarian society and an authoritarian one is that they both share a dark, long tunnel of repression of rights and human misery. But the fundamental difference is that the totalitarian tunnel is much, much longer than an authoritarian one. And all you have to do is look examples around the world, and you will see what I mean. I mean, we Cubans have been at this for 66 years now. It's a very, very long time. It's the longest autocracy in the history of the Western Hemisphere. It was the first totalitarian, and so far the only totalitarian. Venezuela is not quite there yet. And we can talk about why am I saying that Venezuela is not there. I mean, just look at what happened last year with the opposition and Maria Corina Machado. This is something that cannot happen in Cuba, because Cuba is still it's a post-totalitarian in the sense that it's no longer what it was in the 60s and 70s and 80s, but it's still a totalitarian model. So the movement has expanded significantly since then, regardless of the repression that comes and goes, but remains very harsh. And right now we are in one of those harsher cycles of repression. We have more than 1,000 political prisoners right now in prison. I think this is the highest number that we've had since the late 70s, early 80s. I would argue that it's the largest number that we've had. And the fundamental difference between, let's say, the 90s and today is that in the 90s, there were many groups, different groups, that were essentially fighting for the same thing from a different angle. Mm-hmm. There were human rights, like the Cuban Committee for Human Rights. Osvaldo Payá was fighting to change language in the Constitution. There were independent media that were just promoting what was going on from an independent perspective. There were labor groups that were fighting for labor rights. There were women's group fighting for women's rights. The ladies in white specifically were fighting for their own relatives in prison. Right now, the base of this resistance movement against totalitarian society has expanded towards the entire island. And we can still point to individual names. Jose Daniel Ferrer is the first one that comes to mind. I think Jose Daniel today is the most important leader of the Cuban opposition. I would say there is no question about that. There are others in Cuba who have been there for a long time, others who have joined more recently. Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara, for example, an important figure of the most recent movement, which I would argue is one of the most important developments in this larger expanding base of the opposition against the government, because since San Isidro, which is the movement that Otero Alcántara started a few years ago, the larger cultural, intellectual Cuban sector has joined the fight, openly joined the fight. There was some skepticism from that sector before. After San Isidro, we are all one family of Cubans opposing totalitarian rule and essentially seeking the same goal, which is a return to a democratic, open society with market rules in the economy and with complete respect for civil and political rights. I think we all agree on that. It's just a question of what can we do together to accelerate the end of the regime. And I personally believe that we are witnessing sort of that last track. I cannot, unfortunately, tell you how long it's going to take, but the regime is in what is known in post-totalitarian evolution theory to be the last phase. They are paralyzed. They are in the phase known as post-totalitarian paralyzed. They don't know what to do. They don't have any door out that is not a transition to democracy. There are other doors, but they have darker ends. And thinking about what happened in Romania, that is not what we're looking forward in Cuba. That is not what we should be looking forward in Cuba. We should be looking for a soft landing, similar to what happened in Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, East Germany, a negotiated way out of this endless, bottomless crisis that we are in. That is essentially, it has already devastated the Cuban society and the Cuban economy, but it's doing even further damage to the future of the nation because we are the incredible shrinking nation right now. You know, we have lost almost 20% of our population in the last 5 years. And that's unsustainable. Anyway, you look at it, it's unsustainable. So there's an ongoing fight, and I think we are about to reach the end. I think we're in the last stages of this long, dark tunnel.
Yes, before we get to a question about the exodus that has taken place and its impact on Miami, I want to just embroider upon what you said, that there was, I would say 20 years ago, a phrase that was bandied about on the island that was skeptical of what were pretty heroic acts on the part of performance artists in particular. I would say Luis Otero Alcantara, who is now in jail and was arrested the morning of the 11th of July protests and had just 2021 had just been in jail in the month of May and released in part because of international protests and then was rejailed. He was part of the growth of that movement of artists to project direct critiques onto the street and thereby empower citizens to take off those shrouds of silence. And so the response to that, the cynical response, was to say, el arte no tumba gobierno, which means art does not topple government. I would argue that it does ultimately have an extraordinary impact in the erosion of the power of a dictatorial state to constrain, contain, and manage people's fear, as well as their will to speak openly and to critique. So I think the role of art in Cuba has been extraordinary, and it continues to reshape what is the consciousness in society on the island of a need for change, alongside those, as you say, who pre-existed them as a parallel movement of human rights and were openly advocating and acting in favor of human rights. So I think, too, you add to this, the extraordinary exodus, which now in the last 2 years totals, by conservative estimates, more than 1 million Cubans. The percentage of the people who have left is around 23% of the total population. These are younger Cubans leaving an aged population on the island in disproportionate numbers. We also have a reality of thinking about where those folks went, and that would be largely to South Florida. I think that good estimates are about 70% of the million who left have arrived or settled in South Florida in the last 2 years. So what do you say is the most palpable impact of those newly arriving Cubans on South Florida, perhaps on its political culture, on its daily life, on its economy? You pick a dimension there.
Yeah,
there are so many.
The most important impact that I have personally seen is the lines at the DMV are out of this world. Everybody's getting a driver's license, and my son a couple of years ago went through that process, and it was very difficult to get in because of the lines of the people coming in. I would argue that the impact of this massive latest wave. This is the largest wave ever out of Cuba into the United States. We will feel that in the years to come. These people need to assimilate, they need to incorporate into the economy. And what is extraordinary about Miami and the Cuban American community is the enclave, what it has been classified as the enclave of Cuban Americans. The enclave, this family of Cubans, this community of Cuban Americans living in South Florida has been able to absorb this mass of recent arrival Cubans in ways that are extraordinary. You barely notice any difference beyond the expansion of traffic, or if you, let's say, if you go to Costco and you notice that it is much more packed than years before, and you hear a lot more of the recently arrived Cuban accent of people buying at Costco. Beyond that, I think it's extraordinary that you cannot argue, you cannot point to any incidents, to any disruption in the community by the arrival of almost 1 million people. Think about Mariel. We got 125,000 during Mariel. I was, of course, not here in Cuba. But that caused an earthquake in Miami and in South Florida. 125,000. This time around, we get, 8 times more people? And yet, nothing extraordinary has happened in the community. The community has been able to absorb this mass of Cubans. And I think that there is no better way to understand and describe what the enclave is and what it does than by understanding, by looking at it and realizing that, hey, 800,000, no big deal. They have been taken in. It's just extraordinary.
Yes, and it's a testament to the community's generosity and willingness to go beyond their own sense of knowledge of what is happening on the island, to embrace those who come with a very different sense, for, perhaps even a more painful...
And it's so common. It's so I can personally point to at least, I would say at least two groups of people that I personally know who arrive in this latest wave and have already integrated, thanks to the family and the support of the family and the support of the community.
Well, I want to thank you for your leadership at the Cuban Research Institute in facilitating all that you have done for the community and for the larger landscape of understanding Cuba and the United States. And thank you for your personal commitment to human rights. Sebastián Arcos, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Lily, very much for your attention, your time, your consideration. Thank you.